Throughout history, there have been countless stories about objects, places, or discoveries believed to bring misfortune upon those connected to them, eventually gaining reputations as cursed. In previous episodes, we have explored several such accounts, ranging from notoriously unlucky vehicles to the burial sites of convicted killers. In this episode, however, we focus on the preserved remains of an ancient hunter from the Ice Age, a body that some believe became connected to a disturbing sequence of unexplained deaths. Over time, these events would collectively become known as the Curse of the Iceman. As the young journalist sat at his desk reading through the briefing his editor had just sent over, he felt a faint pressure building behind his eyes. It was not the complexity of the document that unsettled him. If anything, it was the opposite. The report consisted of barely more than a single page. Across it were listed the names of 5 individuals, each of whom had died unexpectedly or prematurely. At first, there appeared to be no meaningful connection between them. The deaths had taken place in different countries, under entirely different circumstances and years apart from one another. There was no shared occupation, no common background, and no obvious reason why the cases should have appeared together in the same article. And yet, his editor had grouped them together anyway. The only link identified in the report was an unusual one. Every individual listed had, in some way, been involved in the discovery, recovery, examination, or study of an ancient mummified body found high in the mountains along the Austrian-Italian border. Over the following hour, the journalist began carefully reviewing each case in detail. One after another, the stories seemed to lead him back toward the same central point: the frozen remains of a prehistoric man discovered deep within the Alps. Each person on the list had crossed paths with that discovery, however briefly, before later dying themselves. As patterns slowly began taking shape across the notes scattered on his desk, one particular name continued to stand out. It belonged to a well-respected archaeologist and academic who had played a major role in the scientific analysis of the body. The journalist circled the name, paused for a moment, and reached for the telephone. Several calls went unanswered before someone finally picked up. On the 5th attempt, a voice with a heavy German accent introduced itself as Dr. Konrad Spindler. The journalist explained why he was calling, outlining the apparent connection between the strange deaths and the ancient remains. Carefully, he asked whether the doctor believed there might be any truth behind the growing rumors that the body carried some kind of curse. For a few moments, the line fell silent. Eventually, Spindler replied that, as a scientist, he had no belief in curses or supernatural explanations. Then, with a dry sense of humor, he remarked that if such a curse truly existed, it would probably claim him next. And if that happened, this conversation would likely be their last. Shortly afterwards, the call ended. Neither man could have imagined that only a few months later Spindler himself would be dead, his name added to the same growing list they had just discussed. Nor could the journalist have realized that the notes sitting in front of him marked only the beginning of a story that would continue expanding long after the ink had dried on the page. The story we are examining this week revolves around the idea of a curse, something unseen, yet powerful enough to affect the lives of those who come into contact with it. While such ideas may belong more to folklore than science, the emotions behind them are far more familiar. Many people experience periods where difficulties seem to pile endlessly on top of one another, where anxiety grows heavier, and where it feels as though some invisible weight is pressing down on daily life. Taking time to recognize and understand those patterns, rather than simply ignoring them, can often make a significant difference. Speaking openly with someone outside your immediate situation can provide perspective, helping to process what is happening and regain a clearer sense of direction. There have certainly been moments in my own life where problems accumulated to the point that everything felt impossible to organize mentally, and simply talking through those situations helped restore a degree of clarity. BetterHelp is a trusted paid partner that provides a straightforward way to begin that process. After completing a short questionnaire, you can be matched with a licensed therapist suited to your specific needs, often within only a few days. If the therapist does not feel like the right fit, switching to another professional can be done easily at no extra cost. More than 6 million people have already used the platform as part of their personal growth journey. If you are interested in understanding yourself more clearly or developing healthier ways to handle the pressures of life, you can learn more by using the link in the description or visiting betterhelp.com/bedtimestories to receive 10% off your first month of therapy. On the 19th of September 1991, 2 German tourists arrived at a police station in Innsbruck, Austria, carrying a highly unusual story. The couple, Helmut and Erika Simon, explained that earlier that day they had been hiking in the high alpine region near Similon Mountain, close to the border separating Austria and Italy, when they discovered what appeared to be a human body trapped within the ice. Because of the harsh mountainous environment, their first assumption was that the remains belonged to a climber who had recently died in an accident, tragic but far from unheard of in the Alps. However, as they moved closer, it quickly became clear that something about the body was deeply unusual. The remains did not resemble those of a modern mountaineer. There was no contemporary climbing equipment nearby, no modern synthetic clothing, and no obvious indication that the death had occurred recently. Disturbed by the discovery, the couple descended from the mountain and alerted local authorities. Later that same day, guided back to the location by the Simons, a police officer and local mountain ranger climbed up to inspect the site for themselves. Their examination confirmed that a human body was indeed embedded within the ice, though attempts to recover it proved unsuccessful. The corpse was frozen too firmly in place, and the available tools risked damaging the remains during extraction. Over the next several days, a larger and more organized recovery operation was assembled. Eventually, the body was carefully removed from the glacier and transported to a nearby mortuary for examination. Several weeks later, preliminary findings were released by Konrad Spindler, an archaeologist from the University of Innsbruck who had been assigned to study the remains. Radiocarbon analysis soon revealed something extraordinary. The body was not decades old, but thousands of years old. The man had died roughly 5,000 years earlier during the late Neolithic era. Spindler and his team concluded that the remains belonged to an adult male whose body had been astonishingly preserved by the frozen alpine environment. He was eventually given the name Ötzi, after the Ötztal Alps where he had been discovered. Further examination gradually uncovered remarkable details regarding his life, health, and violent death. Ötzi had been carrying numerous tools and possessions, including a copper axe, a flint dagger, and unfinished arrows, suggesting he may have held a respected role within his community as either a hunter or traveler. Detailed medical analysis later revealed an arrowhead lodged deep inside Ötzi's left shoulder. The wound showed no signs of healing, indicating it had been inflicted shortly before his death. Investigators also identified traces of blood from several different individuals on his clothing and weapons, strongly implying that he had recently been involved in some form of violent conflict shortly before dying in the mountains.